Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to The Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am your gracious host and guide along the way. My name is Captain Frodo. What a pleasure it is to have you back here with me. If you are back with me, but if you haven't come along on this journey thus far and you're just dropping in right here now, me and my fellow travelers have already ventured quite a bit along this way, and this time each episode is kind of follows on the episode before. So if you haven't followed along, then I suggest go back to episode 24 in case you feel a little lost in this episode. So go back and take the whole trip, and I'll wait for you here. And for the rest of you, it's good to have you back. Now let's get on our way. Last week we started to talk about the word showman as if it was one of those signs with many arrows on it that points in many directions. And this is a show points to the external, what we defined as the exoteric, what is on show for the world to see, and man is what is pointing inwards towards an understanding of humans and how they are quite filled with questions. That was one of the things we looked at. We are kind of shapeshifters. Human beings are born into the world quite unspecific, and then we gotta form ourselves through the conversations that we have with the world. We shape the world and are again shaped by the world in a constant ongoing conversation. So last time we did look into the words esoteric, which means sort of hidden and interior, and the exoteric, which means the world on show. So we looked a little bit at words, at whole and detail, and we sort of named these two words, or these two directions, or these two arenas, or the two domains, as we call them, two geographies: our inner geography and our outer geography. And that we looked at the words, it was where the word showman comes from and everything, but I think this will get you up to scratch. Anyway, if you're unclear about anything, go back to the previous episode and you won't feel as lost. As I was preparing for this episode, I realized that the topic of this is the frontier of authenticity, as to trying to understand what authenticity is, and it's a complex thing, and we're going to look at it. But as I was going through the topic, I realized that I'd written something not quite about this, but I wrote a post on my blog, theilluminatedshowman.com, that I was publishing blogs on quite frequently about nine years or so ago, and I found this episode there on Originality that seems like what I'm going to redo first. It's sort of, this might show the development of my thinking. I've been a little bit unsure as to whether I should do that first and to give it to you in the order, but I think I'm going to start with the more recent stuff. This is an interesting stop. I think authenticity is a word that's quite complex, and I hope we can grasp a little bit about grasp this word in a useful way. But then once we've done that, we'll sit down somewhere along the way, and I'll tell you a tale of myself 9 years ago, and you can compare the notes of these two things and see how my thoughts have developed in the time between then and now. With that, let's get on our way. The frontier of authenticity. The crowd sees the exoteric and feels the esoteric. They align into authenticity. The crowd sees the exoteric, but feels the esoteric. These two align into authenticity. I think original art springs from truthful expressions along the intersection of one's two geographies. If you can get to the frontier between the two and hold an honest conversation with yourself, you stand a good chance at arriving at something which your audience will experience as truthful and original. If there is a concordance between what you present and the way you present it, your audience will find it interesting. That is certainly my experience. And it's striking to me how the interesting space between the audience and showman bears a qualitative similarity to the interesting space at the frontier between our inner and our outer geographies. As we've already pointed out, the word interest literally means to be between. And this interest, then, this can be understood as belonging to both the feeling of undivided attention the audience will engage in whilst in this interesting space, and also the kind of space that emerges in the meeting of our own two geographies. The interesting place, the place between, the midway, is a supremely powerful place to be, no matter the place one stands. The arena one plays one's games within, be it art, work, or love. The greatest artists, I believe, they all live along this frontier. But what is authenticity? What exactly authenticity is can be a very complex question, which has been a matter of interest for philosophers from Plato and onwards, so hundreds, if not thousands of years. The question of ultimate authenticity starts with the position that each of us are capable of judging a situation and forming a view of what should be done, and then to act on it, or not act on it, if that's what the inclination leads us to. And from there it branches out into the motivations for the thoughts or the actions that we take or not taking. And in here we're asking ourselves if we're dancing to the beat of our own drum, or if we're following the rhythms and lead of others. Are you acting out of a love of the idea, or a fear of punishment, or being ostracized? It goes on evolving from there. It's a really complex thing, through Immanuel Kant and on to the existentialist philosophers. But for our purposes here, and to avoid some of the murky depths of this inquiry, authenticity is chiefly concerned with the experience of having witnessed or partaken in an authentic act. As performers, we want our audience to experience what we do as authentic, as in that the origin of the act was ourselves, maybe that it happened for real in this moment and it was truthful, and that's what we mean with that it's been witnessed, and what I said, like of the experience having been witnessed and as truthful or authentic, and yeah, we lost the thread there a little bit. But for us performers, the experience of authenticity is from the audience is enough. We can always discuss endlessly whether it is truly authentic or not. But if the audience experience us as authentic, then for now this is perhaps all that we need to concern ourselves with. Because I'm sure that the authenticity of you or your act, or what authenticity itself might be, is a whole lot more complex. And on this topic, I am again reminded of Augustine's answer, I know what it is, but when you ask, I don't. We all kind of know what authenticity is, and in this age of influencers and stuff, people who have an authentic expression, be it on Instagram or on any kind of social media or in anything with this is a quality that we can recognize, but if we fully start to dig into it, it's complicated. That's a t-shirt to get. I believe it's more complicated than what first appears. Now, I believe that when the inner and the outer expressions of the showman is in alignment, then it's experienced as authentic by the audience. Similarly, I experience something as true and authentic when something I say or do in the world that aligns with my inner idea of myself. Viewed in this way, authenticity is something we feel. It's an experience. When our favorite poet recites a poem she wrote, when a singer or a band performs their song, it can scream genuine, original expression. And the experience is real. Philosophy be damned. So there can be deep truth in anything that's spoken, anything that's acted, and there's something there in the whole vocabulary of your movement, of how your body moves when you talk. A person might walk out on stage, and before they even say anything, you might experience them as authentic, and then they open their mouth and it can go the other way. But of course, authenticity is not just connected to words. There's also authenticity or a certain very powerful truth in skills. Like if you can juggle 5 balls, or make a real lemon magically appear under a hat, or do a one-armed handstand, this is a kind of authentic truth. It's a truth you can't argue with. It's like David Whyte saying, poetry is this language that you don't have any defenses again, or you can't protect yourself against. I think that skills too, skills executed in a beautiful way, has a certain skill. Has a certain truth. I mean, your display of skill becomes an undeniable truth. Even without comment or context, the truth of it happening is experienced by the spectators. They take it in, and that changes them. It changes the way they experience you, because their experience of this truth can potentially be transferred to affect whatever else you're doing in your act. Thus, the direct experience of truth, which true mastery of a skill presents, can connect your inner and your outer truth, and it is a powerful tool. When a showman sincerely inhabits this space where the inner and the outer harmonizes, strange things becomes possible. And when the skills presented perfectly comes together with a sentiment expressed, it has a powerful effect on an audience. It's very different to do if you're a juggler, to stick with that example, and you go out and you knock people's socks off with juggling rings and clubs and do an old 7-ball juggle, and you catch one behind your neck and you throw it up and you do a pirouette and you catch it. If that's your opening, and then after that you say, "Hello everybody, my name is Olav and I am a juggler," you experience that tremendously different after the act than if somebody came out and said something like that first. "Hello, I am Olav and I am the juggler here tonight." That is totally different. The way you need to say it and the way the audience experiences you is just completely different. There's a bit of text or a line, as we say it in the business, that under normal circumstances would be heard as the worst hallmark get-well inspirational drivel, can become powerful and truthful expressions of authenticity when mixed with skill. And the kind of deep but banal, ordinary, miracle kinds of truths that we might associate with psychedelic experiences or mystical or religious, philosophical epiphanies and insights, like the maxim that we're working with right now. Authentic truth is found at the frontier of inner and outer geographies. This has the potential to be read as shallow and empty, or powerful and meaningful, depending on the person saying it and the situation it's said in. Authentic truth is found at the frontier of inner and outer geographies. When we've worked up to it over these last episodes, it can ring very powerfully true, but if combined with some skill or some other circus tools, because it can also call skills as a form of tools to elicit emotions in the audience that's watching it. Now, alright, it has the powerful to be deep and meaningful, depending on the person saying it and the situation it's said in. And to show that this is not just some abstract philosophical or semantic exercise, let's return to how a hallmark card truth expressed in the show can become a powerful, authentic expression. So let's look at an authentic case study featuring yours truly. Because I had the pleasure of performing with an extraordinary company of people for 12 years. The group, which included management and crew and artists, hit their triumphant stride under the name La Clique. And this same gang, plus minus a few, later changed their name to La Soirée. It was the most outstanding cabaret success the modern world had ever seen, if we are to trust the reviews and text which our publicists wrote. It became a phenomenon which inspired a whole catalogue of productions and shows, from the straight-up copycats to the gloriously transformed. And for almost the entirety of these 12 years, one of my acts closed the show. The act was not the most flamboyant or razzle-dazzle-filled production number in the show. It was not the most in-your-face nude woman magician. It was not the hot guy doing aerial straps in the bathtub, or a couple of English gents with bodies like He-Man from Masters of the Universe. The act was a triumphant return of a character, yours truly, doing something very different from what the audience had seen him do in the first half before the interval. My first act was my tennis act, and in this I'm funny, very clumsy, and a little repulsive, perhaps, and I set myself a seemingly simple goal of squeezing myself through the heads of two unstrung tennis rackets. And this act is arguably my greatest hit. It certainly is what's paid my bills, what has had me trailing around the world since before the end of the last millennium. Continuously employed. And from the audience's point of view, the tennis act is just a crazy romp, funny, exciting, and it defies belief. And everything seems to be so out of control and chaotic that you can hardly believe that just as the fanfare music hits, I managed to get through the rackets. My return at the very end of the show is a bit of a surprise. I come on after an act which by its lateness in the program, as well as the overwhelming nature of its impressiveness, makes the audience assume that the show has peaked and that is the end. But before they finish clapping, this funny tennis guy from the first half of the show appears on top of a grand piano in a perfectly pointed follow spot, carrying a metal trash can. A gritty recording of accordion, guitar, slightly out of tune piano, and a tentative clarinet crackles through the speakers, and the funny guy pulls a smaller bin from the garbage can, then flips the garbage can over and climbs up onto it. Up there, he pulls yet another smaller bin from the one he just pulled out, and with this one in hand he places the first bin onto the garbage can and climbs on top of the bin. And on this even smaller platform he pulls out a silver paint tin and climbs atop that. And finally, like a metal-nested Russian dolls collection, he pulls out a can of beans. And each of the cans and bins stacked upside down on each other makes the stack higher and more precarious. And the area rapidly becomes way too tiny to fit a fully grown man-child. The balancing act seems all the more impossible since the last time the audience saw this funny tennis guy, i.e. me, I could hardly stand up. I fell over several times and even fell off the stage completely. And the idea of me atop this precarious tower seems very bad indeed. And after pulling out the last can and maneuvering myself to sit on this tiny top, I almost tumble off backwards to an audible gasp from the audience. This is coincidentally right when the music ends, which nobody really notices, I guess, but usually gets this. And I say, having regained my balance, sitting atop the stack of cans, I say, Isn't it just amazing what people can do for a living? And the crowd bursts out laughing at this point. And it's the close of the most spectacular cabaret show that they've ever seen. This is from the audience point of view. They've been moved, they've laughed, so they cried, they've been aroused by strong, sexy women and men, all so very different, but all presenting their acts with the same intense truthfulness, each completely engrossing on their own, and also filling out their perfect share of a glorious whole, each so idiosyncratic and weird, but you really have the feeling like each of one of them is presenting something that they created, that is theirs and theirs alone. And the show and the audience have climaxed watching my good friend David O'Meara, who does one of the sexiest cabaret acts in the world, where he takes a bath whilst performing an extraordinary aerial act, splashing the front row and a few rows more with his flirtatious squirting. Not a seat in the house is left dry, as our producer and brother-in-arms Brett Haylock would say, as he introduced the act. By the act's end, by what they think is the show's end, the climax, finale, the audience has arrived at the frontier of authenticity. The skills and expressions they have watched are truthful and authentic, perfect overlays of inner and outer. Then, after this spectacularly wet bathtub climax, comes yours truly, the funny man, the showman, the clown. And here the duplicitous nature of the clown as the soul of the circus comes to its full fruition. And we know this duality from outstanding moments in early cinema like Charlie Chaplin, the master showman, the master clown, who not only has us laughing with his ridiculous problems as he encounters the world, but he also has us weeping with the undeniable truths he has to tell in his masterpieces like The Kid or in The Dictator, where he actually speaks. The clown is simultaneously the lowest and the highest. He's like the ace in the deck of cards, even though there is actually a card in the deck specifically designed to fit the clown, which of course is the Joker. And just after the climax, like some post-coital cigarette, I get to present one last ridiculous act. I apparently risk my life as I, atop of the wobbly stack of cans, attempt to place both of my legs behind my head, and to balance on the world's tallest, tiniest, and most precarious chair, an upturned can of beans on a 5-meter-high stack of metal tins, cans, and bins atop a grand piano on a platform. At this very real, very particular, powerful point in the show, when I point out that it is amazing what people can do for a living, the crowd is with me. They aren't protecting themselves anymore. They expect me to tell funny. So when I then sneakily begin telling the truth rather than tell more funny, they are completely open and unprotected. They're no longer listening with their minds, but with their hearts. They are listening without filters, and it is at this moment I say, I would now like all of you to try and think about something that you wanted to do with your life, but that you always thought was just too weird or too strange to pursue, whilst now that you have all seen what we do for a living, I gesture to the stage and the people they've just seen, maybe as you have, now that you've seen what we do for a living, maybe that dream of yours doesn't seem so strange anymore. Follow your dreams, ladies and gentlemen, for you can be whatever you want. And as I lift up my first leg and then place it behind my head, towering high above them, all of them there as they're sitting below me, I finish up by saying, I wanted to be the incredible rubber man, and now I am. And at this point I placed the second of my legs behind my head without any help from my hands, and in a feat which by one reviewer from the Sydney Morning Herald was described as a triumph of optimism over biology. And I let go with my hands and perform an unthinkable, ridiculous, and incredible act. The physical skill screams its authentic truth just as I finish my monologue. And balancing on a tin can on a 5-meter tall stack of trash bins and cans, I sit like an Indian mystic in the pictures of the ancient ascetics who became one with the universe, or one with all, as they lived out their lives atop a pole. The experience of this, from one critic, the audience experience of this was described by one critic as, said, "I've seen Captain Frodo several times, yet his act remains mesmerizing. In its own way, a comment on the absurdity of all outlandish human endeavor, whether it is climbing Mount Everest, reaching the South Pole, or pushing your limbs into impossible positions." That was Lynn Gardner in The Guardian that said that when I was there with last Friday. And anyway, in that moment, this is to not just to toot my own trumpet, which, yeah, let's not go there. In that moment, at the end of the journey, we, the presenters of the show, La Soirée, and the audience, has undertaken together the exoteric, which is what the audience has seen, and the esoteric, which is what they feel. We've undertaken a mystical union. The exoteric, in this case, me, balancing in this impossible position, is experienced as authentic, which it is. You can't fake that stunt happening right before your very eyes. And at the peak of the act and the show, I speak my esoteric truth. Follow your dreams, for you can be whatever you want. Which in that moment resonates with their own experience of inner truth. I have followed mine, and I have become this person. And they liked it. They've just seen 10 remarkable examples of this just before their eyes. And what could potentially be heard as a Hallmark card inspirational quote, like "follow your dreams, because you can be whatever you want," this transcends trite cliché and becomes 100% authentic truth. And in that moment, at the end of our long journey, a moment of profound truth appears, which has a very real potential to move the audience to such a point that it triggers a chain of events that might cause real change in their own lives. And I say this with the conviction of having met audience members who came back to the show years later and told me things they'd done, things they'd changed, things they'd altered in their life. So they are moved to the point of change. And in that moment on the top of the cans, I speak the truth which they feel, and I perform the truth which they see, and it all comes together in one higher mode of experience, a completely 100% artificial creation, a truly human experience. And there is nothing about what I do which makes any sense to any other species on Earth. A dog watching my act, even as the conclusion of the entire presentation of La Soirée, will merely look up as I begin to speak, but will, upon noticing that nothing of consequence is going on, go back to licking his balls. Whilst for us, human beings, it is a moment of sublime harmonic resonance between what it feels like to be a human being and the world as we experience it through our senses. It's a beautiful coming together of actions, thoughts, and emotions. We will continue to develop this idea of the frontier of authenticity. This frontier of authenticity is also the very space of interest. It's the point where we meet the audience, it's the point where we meet ourselves, and if we can align these two up with each other, then we're quite far along the way of having a good conversation with the world, our audience, and with ourselves. So, and that's the end of today's episode in a way, but as a kind of bonus then, I will look through and read for you this essay that I wrote on Tuesday the 14th of February 2012. Well, that's at least when it was published. So that's 9 years ago. The piece was then called Originality, and it opened with a quote that said, from Voltaire. And the quote said, "Originality is nothing but judicious imitation." Nothing but judicious imitation. The most original writers borrowed from one another. The instruction we find in books is like fire. We fetch it from our neighbors, kindle it at home, and communicate it to others, and it becomes the property of all. So Voltaire said this. I haven't written back then when or where this came from, but it's probably not too difficult to find if you needed to. And this quote, in a way, also foreshadows something we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about a fire quite a lot as we move on into the next legs of this journey, the next chapters of The Way of the Showman that we'll find in future episodes. So we'll look at the fire and the process of fire. But I like it here as well, how it connects up to this idea of we fetch the fire from our neighbors, kindle it at home, and then communicate it to others, and thus it becomes the property of all. The essay goes on. It says, "A while back, a friend of mine told me that he really liked one of my ideas in an act that I perform. It was a particular apparatus that I had been developing over a 3-year period, starting in early 2002. I thanked him for speaking to me, and then he told me that he was going to make one of these for his own show, and I said nothing. He asked me if it was okay, and I said I didn't feel good about it, but didn't know what I could do to stop him. Now, at that time then, it became the finale of his show. And also I can remember that after that, another friend of mine, Shep Huntley, told me of a conversation that he had in Edinburgh one of those years, or that he overheard it, where just someone said, "Oh, well, you should telling him," as a suggestion for him, because Shep Huntley does an act where he is on the ground, like a ground act with a bed of nails and a bowling ball. When he used to do street shows, that's what he did. So someone said, "You should do something, get up high, get on a big stick, or get on a unicycle, or get a can stack," because the apparatus that my friend borrowed or copied, it is the can stack that I just described in the last act. But it took me a long while to get to that, actually, where it first started out as I stacked a bunch of milk crates on top of each other. But that takes a lot of space, taking these crates and stick them on top. People do chair stacks and people do many things. But these cans, the fact that they fit inside each other, one of those things that is just developed from doing it. Anyway, the essay goes on in 2012. It says, "I collect and read circus books. The main part of the act my friend liked. The main skill, not the apparatus I perform, the skill on it came from a book." So now I'm talking about the development of the legs behind the head. And that book was a celebration of Robert Ripley, the man behind the world-famous Ripley's Believe It or Not. In this book there was a picture of a man who could sit on a whiskey glass with his legs behind his head. And I later saw the same trick on a postcard. I believe I got that when I was with the Kamikaze Freak Show, so it must have been in the end of the 90s, where a man calling himself Uncle Sam sat on a little perch in the same posture. A man in almost the same posture, though not actually balancing but sort of holding on, featured on the cover of a book called Freakery, Cultural Spectacles of the Extraordinary Body. Let alone that the feat has been performed within the yoga tradition for those, for who knows how long. So in the end, I too had borrowed something to create that act, even if I had specifically dreamt up the apparatus I performed it on. But does this mean that if I have borrowed this and he borrowed it from me, does that mean that there are no original acts? Perhaps not. But still, people who see me, they get the feeling that I am presenting something new and original. Yet it's steeped in the showman's tradition. I do think my act is original, but to understand this, we might have to look a little closer at what it actually means to be original. In my presentation of the act, the music specially created for the act by a fellow artist and dear friend Michelangelo, which I mentioned, I think in last episode, we were doing a season in the Opera House, or at least, if not, then I'm misremembering and it's coming up soon. But no, I did do that because I was in Wollongong at that time, and that was the same Michelangelo from Michelangelo and the Black Sea Gentleman who'd written that music, and he wrote this, and we used this song that I have been using for the cans in this show, The Carnival Goes On. And in a way, that's the reason why I started doing these very cans is also connected to that show, because as I mentioned earlier, I had been using these red milk crates, and the red milk crates are made out of plastic. It's a kind of thing that you can see on the streets in Australia. I think you're not just allowed to steal them really, but we were young, needed the money. So, but doing this show, The Carnival Goes On, it was set in a kind of different aesthetic, and the plastic crates just didn't really fit. And that's where I then found a couple of cans underneath the house we were living in Dornoch Terrace in Brisbane. Under there was a couple of I was living with Tiger Lil at the time, and underneath that house there was many people had lived in that house over a long period of time, and there was just stuff under the house. And there were some cans, metal containers, just like buckets of I don't know what, coming from I don't know where, but a few of them fit inside each other, and that was the first place where I came up with that thing, to change the act to fit the crooked accordion waltzing music of Michelangelo. So this music that he created especially for the act, that gives form and structure to the flow of the act, the sequence of tricks that has been mastered by me over the years, my physicality, my visual gags, the running gag of the confetti throwing, and the final dream spiel I deliver upon reaching the summit of the can stack. This symphony of elements is what makes my act original. Not because the elements each sprouted into existence in a vacuum, but in their novel recombination and in my unique execution of it all. And there, in that little sentence, not because of the elements, because the elements each sprouted into existence in a vacuum, but in their novel recombination and in my unique execution of it all, there we see, I now, looking back, of course, reading it with what you've just heard, I see the sort of seeds of that idea of the inner and the outer coming together, and you being able to embody the skills and all the content and the way that I move and all of this together with the music. I think the idea is a little bit more fleshed out now, but I see it here. Going on with the essay, for a long time I have been saying that if someone claims to have created something genuinely new, they just haven't studied history enough. This does not mean that there are no new or original acts created. On the contrary, new and novel combinations and evolutions appear all the time. But what is seen as new by crowds are sweet remixes of the great showman of the past, whether the creator knows it or not. So there will be elements in what we have done and what we do in our acts that has appeared before, but the key thing, and I don't know if I express it so well in this old essay, but I think that's the key, is whether the audience then experience it as original. That's why someone can deliver a stock and standard line or an old joke, and for all those people who haven't heard it before, which usually is most people, they will just experience this as an off-the-cuff funny remark, and it will feel like a real moment. So one of the things that I then start looking at is this idea that that's described in Austin Kleon's what was that called? Steal Like an Artist. And he sort of stole or borrowed like an artist these ideas from Everything is a Remix, a excellent blog and YouTube video by a guy called Kirby Ferguson. And he had this design that he talked about in there where he calls the basic elements of creativity, and he claims these basic elements of all creativity is copying, transforming, and combination. Copy, transform, and combine. You go out and you copy a whole bunch of things and you transform each of them a little bit, and then you combine all of this stuff together. That's what he sees as the essence of creativity. All of these, he has done a bunch of episodes on YouTube, so Google Everything is a Remix and see what you find. This is all very worthwhile checking out. But on a whole, back to the essay now, on a whole, crowds, common people, I used to call audiences crowds in my writing, they have problems with that which is totally new. People like the idea of newness and novelty, but they do seem to prefer if the new is firmly placed within some recognizable framework. But within a framework or tradition, the very thing that makes it a tradition is the shared evolution of the idea or the art form. Each new creator is borrowing from the same language and the same ideas. So to think of something brand new within a tradition is almost contradiction. It's almost a contradiction. And further, there are then two sides to originality. One, favored by the crowds, is the newness within a tradition, which is experienced as like original, cutting edge, or fresh. And the second is absurd or irrational newness, mad, freaky, or any kind of aberration or kooky. So both these are like, oh, he's a bit of an original, that guy. It can be absurd and weird and not good, and it can also be cutting edge and fresh. At the end of the second half of the last century, I traveled as a street performer, and one of my main obstacles was the inherent freakishness of my contortions and dislocations. As I bent and twisted, parents covered their children's eyes or simply walked away. Of course, the children never had a problem with it, really. To them, it was just like a character from any one of their favorite cartoons. I worked hard on my performance style and presentation, and slowly but surely I found a slapstick, happy-go-lucky attitude which made the crowds tolerate my freakishness. Inspired by Keaton, Chaplin, and Arbuckle, what had been freaky fell within the framework of a tradition which crowds seemed to enjoy enough to stay for. And as I used to say in my street show, a show worth staying for is worth paying for. And of course, freakishness is a tradition in itself. Freak shows and side shows was where I found my feet as a performer, fresh out of my magician father's wings. But that's a different story. So then comes this longer sort of quote. So it turns out there's a lot of people who have been thinking these thoughts on what originality actually is, and that it is this recombination of ideas, and it's in the recombination certain people recombine ideas and it just seems like it was a hodgepodge. Certain people steal from other artists and it's an awful thing to see, and some people manage to steal from enough people so that it really resonates as something new and authentic. So this is a quote by Jim Jarmusch, who made some tremendous movies. I really like his movies. Dead Man really springs to mind, and Down by Law. If you haven't seen Dead Man and Down by Law by Jim Jarmusch, get them out. It's absolutely amazing stuff. Jim Jarmusch said at some point, easily to be found on the internet, that nothing is original. Steal from anywhere that resonates with inspiration or fuels your imagination. devour old films, new films, music, books, paintings, photographs, poems, dreams, random conversations, architecture, bridges, street signs, trees, clouds, bodies of water, light and shadows. Select only things to steal from that's what speaks directly to your soul. If you do this, your work and theft will be authentic. Authenticity is invaluable. Originality is non-existent. And don't bother concealing your thievery. Celebrate it if you feel like it. In any case, always remember what Jean-Luc Godard said. It's not where you take things from, it's where you take them to. Thanks, Jim Jarmusch. If originality is merely clever recombinations of old ideas, emotions, and techniques, what then is it that makes certain art and artists feel so new and original? I think the answer lies in the artist's ability to make his material ring true in the hearts of crowds, in his audience. Great art resonates with people. It stirs emotions and connects the beholder with ideas sublimely expressed by the artist in a way that feels new, illuminating, and most importantly, truthful. Truth is not something that is, but something that happens. An individual experience in the beholder. Truth is only expressed through art when it speaks to a crowd. I think this is pretty an important thought here, that truth is not something that is, but something that happens, something that an individual experience in the beholder. This is where we tie back up again to the idea of authenticity that we talked about before. Truth is only expressed through art when it speaks to a crowd or to an audience. And if it works, it becomes truthful, undeniable, and beautiful. A truth of this nature creates some sort of change in the viewer, a change in the way they perceive the world, or simply bringing forth a very specific or sublime emotion. The better the artist is at communicating with the crowd, the more original the crowd's experience becomes, and hence the more original the artist is perceived to be. Now, by reading circus books and studying the history of showmen, past and present, I am hoping to become the showman of the future, the new old school. It ends with a quote: "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants," which was apparently said by Isaac Newton, inspired from his days as an acrobat in the sideshows where he stood on the shoulders of giants. And of course, at the time, as I was going, somebody was doing something that I was doing. So there's the thing that something is becoming generic. When I was talking about Shep Huntley, who somebody said, "Oh, you should do your act on top of a pole, or on top of a unicycle, or on top of a can stack." So within me being told that somebody wanted to do my can stack that nobody else, as far as I know of, performs, then they saw him perform that in Edinburgh, and off the top of his head he just listed off some possibilities for how to get up high, and within one person borrowing my material or my idea and performing it, we had gotten all of a sudden my idea had become generic, and maybe hopefully it will bring in a good living to other street performers as well. And for me, I would just then have to be secure in my own authenticity as I perform it, that somebody else performing something on top, because still nobody has stolen my whole thing with the music and the act and the confetti and the sitting on top and balancing with behind and the words that I say. This is my truth, and I doubt anyone would try to, borrow or steal the whole thing, because the whole concept here then is that you are to borrow from as many as possible. That was the idea that I was talking about in this first essay, and from now, I guess another upshot is that somebody could potentially steal my whole idea with everything and copy it bit for bit and confetti throw by confetti throw, and come across as, if they could come across as completely authentic, then that whether that was authentic or not, this becomes beside the point, because in the way that we've been looking at authenticity today, the authenticity that all that we really need to concern ourselves with in a very practical way is whether the audience experiences the actions that you do as being in full concordance and in full resonance with your inner truth, that they feel that this is something that you are genuinely presenting to them in this moment. So in this way, I see there's quite a lot of overlap between these two ways of looking at it, even with a little more than 9 years in between them. So in one way we can say my ideas have not changed that much. Maybe I have not developed as much as I sometimes think, but we see at least these thoughts have been with me for a long time, and at this point you've also been with me for a long time, even in this episode. And so we come to an end of another authentic episode with incredible thefts from all over, from philosophy and from showmanship and the history of circus and the history of my blogging, and everything all comes together. It's as always, it's a very good thing to have this share this journey with you. I'm so glad you're coming back, and if you have enjoyed this and you want to support it, then you can go over to the website buymeacoffee.com, and by a simple click you can give me a donation about the price of a coffee. You can easily give me 2 coffees or 3 coffees with some simple clicks. Go and have a look. Might be something you wanted to partake in. If not, then that's also totally okay. It's enough for me to share this journey with you, and I already look forward to next time. And with that said, all that's left to be said is take care of yourself and those you love, and I hope to see you along the way.